Hey everyone, we started off our debut episode with debut albums, so today it would have been easy to do something like a second album or a double album or a sophomore slump, something like that, but we decided to do something different. We decided to do an overlooked album, and when we started to talk about this, it was kind of really hard to get into what is an overlooked album. I kept asking Pat, what technically is an overlooked album. So, what is an overlooked album, Pat?
Right, exactly. And I got to say, it was kind of challenging because there's so many ways to sort of come at this. For me, when Blake had mentioned that we should do this, it would be very simple to go over. You could go over all three Big Star albums, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Alex Chilton. It's one of those things where Big Star really was overlooked in their time. Something else that sort of clicked in was Arthur Lee and Love, the album Forever Changes. What's funny though is that Big Star and Love are well known, I think, among like if you want to call it audiophiles, what have you.
Yeah.
And obviously, they're heavy influence from both of those artists. Actually, much like the album or the albums and artists that we're going to be mentioning. However, we kind of felt like that was maybe a little too well known. It's almost like saying like, "Hey, underrated," but sort of talked about so much that it almost becomes sort of standard. I think to sort of mention
Yeah,
something
for
like
sure.
Big
Because
Star.
if you don't know, like Big Star is, they were definitely well known for being that kind of artist, or especially those two albums, like Number One Record and what's the
Radio
other?
City
Radio City. Yeah,
and
yeah,
Third Sister Lovers, right?
yeah,
Exactly. So it's kind of funny because it would be very easy to talk about those, and we're doing a pretty good job of doing that right now. But it
yeah,
does seem like there's a lot of artists that have referenced them over and over and over again to the point where it's saturated enough, I think, within sort of musical discourse. That's
hmm
something along those lines. But regardless, we definitely wanted to dig a little deeper. I think these albums that we're picking are perhaps a little more personal. We're looking at it from a more of what do we feel is overlooked within the artists that we appreciate, and maybe really people don't really know about or maybe aren't
hmm
as aware of. Maybe you know all of these albums, and that's great. And hopefully you'll be able to share your thoughts.
yeah, and I mean, maybe Big Star didn't make it on this one, but who knows? Maybe they'll make it in a future episode for those albums, and maybe people will listen in the future for something like that.
I agree, and
Yeah,
especially also Love's Forever
yeah,
Changes, one of the great.
yeah. Those are going to fit in
Yeah,
somewhere.
absolutely.
Just
So
didn't fit in today. Well, but we have a really good selection here. So
yeah,
what
hope
I
you like
went
it.
with was one that I was kind of familiar with. I've listened to a couple times, but it's definitely one of those ones. I think you always mentioned um, them, and I also heard it from a friend. Was Slint Spiderland, and
Yeah,
I pretty much listened to it. It's one of those ones like it was pretty big, right? Not big in a way that I've heard about it before, but it's one that I never just kind of dove into and jumped into because I think the over the production of it's really good, but the sort of like talking about it, the talking during the album, I think is really good.
so I would definitely agree. It's one of those albums that when it was released, I mean, I only heard about it through word of mouth or
Yeah,
how you read about things, and it was
yeah,
way after the time I think that it came out because they're a band from I believe Louisville,
yeah,
Kentucky.
correct.
It's not like in remember this is before the internet as well, so this is something where it has to really sort of seep in a little bit. So
Yeah, for sure. So this album came out in 1991. It came out on Touch and Go Records, and Touch and Go was actually more of a noise rock sort of label. So this actually fits pretty good, I think, with the label as far as what was coming out because they were putting out stuff like the Butthole Surfers, Big Black, the Jesus Lizard, bands like that. So this is definitely one of those albums where it's gorgeous. It's really hard to explain because it how many it's like what 6 or 7 tracks and
right,
all the songs probably go about what 6 minutes long.
right.
But it's one of those albums that it feels just kind of perfect as far as like timing goes.
I will say too,
Mhm.
it's one of those albums that it does take a few spins. At least it did for me
Yeah,
to sort
yeah,
of get all the nuances and intricacies because it's so It's almost it doesn't sprawl, but it's a little sparse, but it's still
Yeah,
beautiful, like as you
yeah. And the
said.
funny
So
thing
yeah.
is like when I was doing the research on it was the uh, Brian McCann's brother. When he heard the album, he described it as spidery. So that's
Oh
where they came
really?
up. Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
where
know
they
that.
yeah they came
Wow.
up with the name Spiderland
And
because
Brian McCann, of course, the
oh yeah
he's the lead singer and the
oh yeah
writer of the songs,
yeah
correct?
yeah. So and then that was the other crazy thing that I found out about this was it was recorded in 4 days.
Oh
Apparently,
wow.
yeah. So with it too, it apparently the recording sessions were really intense and really emotional. There were rumors that somebody in the band was going to check themselves into a like a mental hospital during the recording. So. I think the band got along okay, but they were just really focused on making this album, and
Sort of getting it done.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So um, it's one of those ones where if you listen to even just like the start off track, like the breadcrumb trail, it becomes sort of hypnotic in a way,
Hmm.
and it just even with the harmonics on it and the sort of like uh, talk over. It's not like like you said. It's definitely like a couple listens that it kind of hits, but it's not like something you put on and you're just expecting to hear some sort of pop record. It's definitely a awesome, just like art album for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned art album. I know they've actually been deemed as sort of like math rock
Yeah.
because there's so many different time signatures and
Hmm.
unusual ways of having like especially David, I think it was Pejo who played guitar. It's very
Yeah.
it's sort of
He's
well known.
yeah.
But to me, and I know we'll talk about certain things as we sort of go along here. I'm not a huge fan of prog rock. I always feel like prog rock is sort of interesting,
Hmm.
but it's like, oh wow, this guy can play his instrument extremely well,
Yeah.
and it's so precise. But what I like about this is
Uh-huh.
that there is an aspect I think of prog rock in the sense that these guys really know what they're playing. But as you mentioned with the
Mhm.
emotion, it's that's something that's always missing from prog rock for me is that there's a certain kind of emotion. And when you listen to these songs, especially like "Good Morning Captain," the last song on
Oh
there, I mean,
yeah.
it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So with that last track, it was also a tribute to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote
Oh,
a
Coleridge, yeah, the writing
yeah,
the
yeah,
engineer, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that's what that track is like based off of there. So and another thing was like the reason why this was not a not an album that sort of hit right away, a very overlooked album. It just wasn't a success when it came out,
Right.
which is it's something that I feel like it, a lot of things probably just got like overlooked in the 90s and 1991,
Oh, for sure.
and it was just like one of those ones that it stands out for sure. And if you haven't checked it out, please feel free to do so. There'll be a link at the bottom of the page where we'll list either some tracks of the album. I've listened to this one on YouTube for sure, so you can easily find that one and it's accessible. But moving on,
Yeah.
that's my pick, and these are ones that you've actually given to me on a DVR or a CDR before
Okay.
on these. So I'm vaguely familiar, but you're gonna have to walk me through these, Pat. Okay?
Yeah, the next album I definitely wanted to talk about. It's a band that I really appreciate quite a bit. It's Television Personalities, or TVP as they're more commonly known. I think they're somewhat well known in England. I think more so, obviously, than the states here. Dan Tracy, the lead singer, he writes all the lyrics, he writes all the songs. It's an album of theirs. Really, all their work is terrific. But for me, for my money, they could have been bigger than the Beatles.
Oh,
Which is sort of tongue in cheek. Which obviously he has a wit to his lyrics.
well, what's the time frames? So to fill me in on like when were they popular as a band or a band
For
as
the most
together?
part, it was actually the '70s. I would say
70s. Oh
'70s and
wow.
late '70s and early '80s.
Okay.
They were actually kind of known. This particular album, if I remember correctly, I think it's around 1982. I want to say
Uh huh.
approximately 79, 80, 81, around there. That's pretty much like their time frame.
Hmm.
And it's kind of weird to think too because you think of course of like punk rock
Hmm.
from coming from England and in the late '70s, and of course all the post punk bands and what have you, and they really don't sound. I know Dan Tracy, he was very big on the stuff from the '60s, like the Kinks and the Beatles and what have you.
Mhm.
So he was doing things that were sort of, if you want to say, not exactly in lockstep with what was going on at the time.
Mhm.
That's something that I can certainly appreciate. But regardless, though, some of these songs from here, the very first track, Three Wishes, the the sound of it, and this is gonna harken back. I'm not a Doctor Who guy or anything like that, but I do remember in the '80s there was a Doctor Who that came from the BBC that they would
Yeah.
show on PBS,
Yeah.
and that opening theme song was just incredible. And it sounds a lot like the way Three Wishes. There's
Mhm.
a similarity, and to be honest with you, I don't know if he pulled anything from that, but he's kind of known for pulling sort of cultural references
Mhm.
into his music. The second song, David Hockney's Diary, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously he's alluding to the artist. And, we're actually out here in California. So if you ever make it to the LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, feel free to see all kinds of culture and all kinds of art, including a plethora of David Hockney.
Oh,
You'll
yeah.
always find David
Yeah,
Hockney art out here. So,
I mean, just sidetrack just for a second there.
Mhm.
If you go to ACMA, they have Mulholland Drive,
Mhm.
which is one of his paintings, and it's huge. It's part of their permanent collection, and it's like I don't know, like 60 by 80 feet or something like.
Exactly.
It's
he's
huge.
he's brilliant, but as you
Yeah.
can see, the fact that here's this young guy in England
Mhm.
who's referencing
Oh
David
yeah.
Hockney, like we're talking like the early '80s as far as that goes, which is terrific. So, and to me, there's probably not a better the way these songs just flow. It's
Mhm.
it's very rare, I think, to come across albums where you're kind of like like maybe there's sort of a clunker or one that just sort of makes you go, nope, gonna skip past that. And I feel like with this album, I can just listen to it from start to finish, and it's just it's wonderful. It's just a great album.
Yeah, and I also feel like when I go to record stores now, they have their own category for sure, but it's
Mhm.
definitely one of those things where until you mentioned them to me about like 5 or 6 years ago,
Right.
I had no idea that they even existed, and
Yeah.
it was kind of crazy because now when I see it, it's like there's always a space at the record store for them,
Mhm.
and just it's one of those things. I think it's very sought out after now.
Right.
They've caught on with popularity.
Absolutely.
But
It's kind of interesting too. There was a band
Mhm.
that's quite famous. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. They actually wrote a song about Dan Tracy, and
Mhm.
it was off that one album. Of, if I think of it, I'll certainly mention it as far as that goes. They're kind
Mhm.
of a well-known band that's sort of out there, and it was off of a follow-up album of theirs.
Mhm.
And well, regardless,
Well, I mean, what would you sort of, I mean, categorize if this was like a first time listener listening to this album, what would you consider it like a dream pop album or sort of, I mean, what
yeah.
would you subcategorize it as?
It's kind of interesting because if you do listen to the songs, I mean, it's just casual songwriting. It is kind of mellow at times. It can also be very sort of, oh gosh, it's tough. That's part of I think one of the great things about the band is that they're not really you can't really fit them. They could have come out in the '60s, the '70s, the '80s, the
Yeah.
'90s, and it would be very you'd be like, oh, okay, I can see that band
Yeah, they
being
could
around
even
at
come
the
out
time.
now, I think.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
just, and again,
100%.
they'd probably be overlooked for some reason.
Right. Absolutely.
So, so if you get a chance, check them out. It's something that might be overlooked. If you've never heard of them before, we'll set up a link so that you can check them out. And for what I picked for my next one, it's a very sort of, did you find it?
I did. It was MGMT.
MGMT.
They had and, of course, they had that
Yeah.
huge album.
Oh, yeah.
And then afterwards, they kind of did stuff that was a little bit more, I think, personal. And they
Uh-huh.
actually had a song about Dan Tracy. But
Uh-huh.
regardless, check out TVP, Television Personalities, fantastic.
Yeah.
But let's go.
But for my next one, I picked, so with this subject, it was kind of interesting to pick a big artist and then sort of pick a non-traditional album. So when you think of Beck, you tend to think of Sea Change, you tend to think of Midnight Vultures, you tend to think of Odelay easily, Mellow Gold. I still have not mentioned the album, and it's actually One Foot in the Grave. So this was one that I got from a friend probably about in 2009-ish when they came out with a reissue of the album. It's a really fun one. It's basically Beck. Beck is a chameleon as far as what he can do. He's very much, I would say, kind of like Bob Dylan or David Bowie, where he can kind of change his sound each album
I agree.
and sound very sincere about it, not just to do it as like a hey, I'm gonna be a rap star now or something like that.
Right.
I think he does it in a very clever and relevant way. And for this one, with One Foot in the Grave, this was an album that was actually recorded prior to Mellow Gold. So he had this already ready to go, and Mellow Gold came out. He got a lot of success from that. So this is why this album got overlooked. So this was actually recorded up in Olympia, Washington, with Dub Nartic Studios. It was on K Records by Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson with Beat Happening.
Right.
He owns K Records too. It's if you ever get to check out any of their stuff, it's really just sort of indie rock. And I think this album sort of kind of captures that sort of time and place, because it came out in 1994, where it kind of has like it almost sounds like you're just listening to him in a old wooden shack just playing guitar. He does some covers on it, so a lot of folk covers. So he does Skip James. He's a mighty good leader, which he starts off the album with. He kind of stole the riff and the melody from Mississippi Fred McDowell's "You Gotta Move." Like, You Gotta Move from the Rolling Stones did it on Sticky Fingers or whatever, but he did it as 14 River Flood, Mississippi. And then there's a song on there that's called Girl Dreams, and it's actually a Carter Family song that he kind of stole the melody
wow.
from. Yeah, I know. And if you listen to the Carter Family style of the song, I actually went back and listened to it last night. It kind of almost sounds like a more Woody Guthrie way of composing the song. But the Carter Family, it's like those songs got passed down from generations before music was even recorded, from like the Smoky Mountains and stuff like that. So it was interesting to hear that version of it, because I never listened to like the Carter Family one until I listened to it last night, and then listened to his, because his is like slowed down. It almost sounds like he's coming to this really just sort of slow pace, and the guitar is almost like falling apart as he sings it. And it's a really depressing song, because it's like the lyrics are, the girl of my dreams, you're just the girl of my dreams. It never seems that my dreams come true. And like that's stolen from the Carter Family. And it's like, he was actually, what I read was he was actually kind of embarrassed about the song, because it was, I guess, kind of personal. And Calvin Johnson was the one who actually convinced him or got him to put it on the album. So
that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
It's odd. There's a lot of artists where they're not really quite too sure that it should sort of fit in the album, and to hear that's
and especially with someone like that, because I don't, with his abstract lyrics, going forward, it's like, oh, that must have been like a personal thing for him at the time and stuff like that. But there's a lot of people that are on the album, including Calvin Johnson. He does a very deep voice like this, and they actually got the drummer who went on to go with Built to Spill, Scott Plouffe, and Love Is Laughter, one of my favorite bands, Sam Jane. I heard his voice on it, and I was like, oh, it really sounds like the guy from Love Is Laughter, and it turns out it is. So, again, it's just sort of like a very nostalgic album for that time, and I think very specific place, and it's really overlooked because as of 1996, it only sold like 168,000 copies.
Wow.
For Beck, he only sold 168,000 copies in 2000. That was as of 2008, and
fascinating.
Yeah, and if you do like his other stuff, you hear a very stripped down version of "It's All in Your Mind." It's just him on guitar, and then actually, this is kind of weird to say, but the late great Tom Petty actually covered the song "Asshole" that's on the album. So,
oh wow,
yeah, he did.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did it for a movie called "She's the One." I think "She's the One" was movie with like Cameron Diaz or something like that. But
cool.
Yeah, but anyways, it's a great album. If you get the chance, check it out. Definitely overlooked. It's definitely worth taking a gander at.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
great choice. I love Beck. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, I gotta say the next artist is one of my. I think they're terrific. They're amazing. I'll just go ahead and mention it. Spacemen 3, and it's Jason Pierce and Sonic Boom. That's sort of his name that he goes by, and they were a duo. It's guitar heavy, but it's guitar heavy in that sort of shoegaze way, but not sort of. It's hard to really describe unless you've heard them, because the guitars are a little bit more. Can be a little harder at times. Just to give you an idea, they have a cover on here from a band called Red Crayola, who themselves, they have a great guitar player, but it's Transparent Radiation, and it's so rare to come across a song where you think, well, yeah, the cover is so much better than the original. I think most people would think like something like All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, because it's so different. Well, this adheres to the Red Crayola original, but at the same time, it's just so much more powerful, and you can hear just the way Jason Pierce plays guitar. It's just amazing to me. And there's another I don't know if we want to call it a cover. It's Ode to Street Hassle, which is their play on the Lou Reed song Street Hassle, which of course Street Hassle is very symphonic, and so this is symphonic with guitars in a sense, so in its own way. So.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you on that. Is it sort of like, does it have, because Street Hassle, does it have like the string, like the kind of repetitive dun dun dun?
But that's the thing. They do that with the guitars.
Oh, really?
And they're actually known for using that kind of drone quality.
Uh-huh.
I think the approach that they always take is sort of a minimalistic approach.
Oh.
That's actually their point of view, and there certainly is a blues background also with this band, but you don't really feel like it's overbearing. There's nothing like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but a lot of times I think artists can do that with the blues.
Yeah.
They have a song called "Walking with Jesus," for instance, which has a sort of a blues feel to it, but you don't feel like it's too retro.
Yeah, or it feels like they're just doing another Muddy Waters song or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
So and actually Jason Pierce ended up doing his own band after called Spiritualized, which is his own band. And I've seen them actually. I saw them play live before, and just absolutely terrific. And I know Sonic Boom. He's known for somewhat produce. I know he produced a band called the Warlocks. Afterwards, he's sort of more of a friend of a friend, but Plucky, Jason Anchondo, he's a drummer in that band. And the fact that it sort of seeps in, and you see how these artists, again, sort of, even after they're done, they're not very well known, but they still have these connections to artists as they can continue, because people do find, these artists that we are talking about. But I would definitely say that Spacemen 3, they're just a phenomenal band. And the album is the perfect prescription. They have other albums too, beyond that, but for me, for my money, from start to finish, this is the one.
Yeah, real interesting, because I had no idea that the lead guy from that was in spirit, or he is spiritualized.
Yeah, Jason Pierce. Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea.
Correct.
That's the best part about this, is just learning as we go.
We're definitely helping each other
bouncing off. But before we get to our fifth album here, the top of the top, but not of all time. Again, this is just an arbitrary list. We're just doing this for fun. And again, if you have a top 5 of overlooked albums, please let us know. Or even if you have a top 100, just list them off. Because I had some ones in mind where I was thinking like, oh, maybe it could fit in. Where I thought of like the Kinks, Muswell Hillbilly Boys. I think they're an overlooked artist as it is, but again, I think it kind of falls into the category like you were talking about before. Right. And I think like Radiohead's like Amnesiac, I was kind of thinking about
that's a good one, yeah.
But I feel like it was overshadowed by OK Computer or Kid A.
Right.
But again, it's not necessarily like overlooked.
I know what you mean. It's almost like the album is overlooked, perhaps in the canon of that particular artist, but we all know Radiohead. We all know how great they are, but it's just a shame. I mean, in a sense, Beck is kind of that way too. But however, I had actually never heard of that album until you brought it up. I actually assumed Mellow Gold, especially because, Loser, that was maybe like his sort of foray into it. And to be honest with you, I'm so thankful that you turned me on to that. And then on top of that too, just, telling me about how, he had worked with, Calvin Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's exciting to like learn these new things, especially for...
this one that we picked out for our top 5.
The one that we agreed upon.
Yeah, agreed upon. This was just a really fun one to research. This is Blur's The Great Escape.
Yes.
So one thing that I found out about was like Blur at the time, they were trying to actually do a trilogy of albums that had the word life in them. So they came out with Park Life, and before that, Modern Life is Rubbish. But apparently, like before they actually came out with this album, the record company was, a week before they had to actually press it and title it, and they were just like, what's this one going to be? What's it going to be called? And they tried to squeeze in the word life, but they couldn't do it for some reason. They came up with The Great Escape. So, but this is just a lovely album. It's I don't know, like depressing in a way.
Well, I know it's from what I understand, it's a very personal album for Damon Albarn.
Oh
who
yeah,
wrote,
yeah.
The lyrics, and apparently he was going through my understanding of maybe a little bit of a tough time at here and there stuff too.
Oh
but,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was the interesting thing because if you watch the documentary No Distance Left to Run, they specifically point out the year 1995 in there, and this is when this came out on September 11th in 1995. It came out on Food Records and Virgin Records as well, and they were kind of categorized as like a Brit pop band at the time, which is like I definitely remember living it and sort of like hearing about it, and it's I guess it's different over here in California and in the States as opposed to what it was probably like over there, because it almost seemed like they were like the bad boys of the NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, but it's like the English version, and they're actually talented. Not to say that those guys aren't talented, but they're just talented in a, I don't know, musical sense.
No, I hear you. It's kind of funny because I know that around the time that sort of like quote unquote Britpop came out, it was Oasis and Blur. I mean, there was other bands too. Like, of course, Radiohead, was around at the time, so they were kind of, I think, maybe categorized into that Britpop aspect. Supergrass, bands like that of that nature. But what is funny is that these guys were huge in England, Blur, and obviously Oasis. And Oasis, I think, because of What's the Story, Morning Glory with Wonderwall, they kind of hit a little bit over here, what have you. And what's funny is we're referencing an album in The Great Escape, which went to #1 on the English charts. But at the same time, was it going #1? Sure, a little bit more famous in England, and it's this band, so to speak, that it's like, oh, everybody's championing. The media can sort of do that. But regardless, I really feel like this album, in a lot of ways, and especially because of the fact that Oasis was getting the sort of headlines, especially here in the States, I feel like The Great Escape was absolutely overlooked. Yeah. As far as, to me, if you want to look at sort of if you want to call it the Britpop with, again, Elastica and Pulp and all these other bands that sort of were around at the time, and this is going to be sort of an odd analogy for some, and feel free to blast me for it, but I actually feel this is almost like the Sgt. Pepper of Britpop. Yeah. In many ways. It's so creative. It's so... Oh, yeah. It's just an absolute peak of creativity.
Because they use... like everything, like acoustic guitar, horns. You hear a lot of synthesizer, and it's just like it's such a, it's so melodic too. Like that's the craziest part about it. I also remember reading something. I was trying to find it last night too. Just like the kind of weird like Smiths references, where I saw something online on like a documentary about Blur, where Damon Albarn saw something where he saw somebody from the Smiths. It might have been Morrissey or Johnny Marr. It's probably Morrissey, but it was something where, like, after the Smiths, there's no reason for anybody else to make a band, and so he just kind of like...
Yeah, it sounds like Morrissey.
It sounds like Morrissey, exactly. But
right. And I mean that respectfully too, but...
No, but he's like, well, fuck that, I'm going to make my own band, and they made Blur, and then, this Charming Man is actually kind of like a response to... Right. I'm sorry, what am I thinking of here on the album?
I think Charmless Man.
Charmless Man.
Which is referring to
this Charming Man. Yeah, it's just kind of like a direct sort of like... Right. And that song is unbelievable because it comes in with the guitar. It's just like such a crazy timing, and then just sort of cuts out and then just goes straight to the piano.
Absolutely.
And just you listen to the lyrics, and it sounds a very poppy song, but if you actually read them, it's just very kind of like sad. It's almost like meeting like a D-bag in a bar or something, like... But all the other songs on it are just...
Well, I gotta say too, I remember that. I think the initial single, I want to say if I remember accurately, was Country.
Oh yeah,
Country House.
Yeah,
and it's strange. It's a very pop song, but how unusual to have a song called Country House. Yeah, and it's of course about, I think it's a little bit about class. As far as not class warfare necessarily, but regardless, that is such a challenging original song, and in many ways, though, to have as your first pop single, and it's so distinctly British, and to have like the sort of I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to call it the Stones to like put it out
No,
there,
but
but for
yeah.
them, they were just like, hey, let's get us.
Yeah, and like I think that was the amazing thing about finding out, and one of the reasons why I feel like again it is an overlooked album was
Yes.
because they had a lot of teen girls showing up to their shows, and
Oh,
they
true.
were, they were just trying to establish themselves as artists, and they were,
Right.
making very complex music, and they just kind of wanted to break away from that. And this is kind of like that point in that trilogy where they're just like, we don't we want to be taken seriously, and,
You
and
know,
they definitely established it. And
that's a solid point. It's not like it's like, oh, boohoo, Damon Albarn. He's kind of dreamy or easy on the eyes, but at the same time, you're right. If he wants to be taken seriously, here he's got all these, as you
yeah.
mentioned, people that are actually like going like, oh, hey, but there's so much depth to this
Oh
guy.
yeah,
And obviously with what he's done with Blur, and then his career
yeah,
continued with
and I think
Gorillaz
Graham Coxon as a
Oh,
guitar
yeah,
player,
yes.
he is amazing.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
I've seen things online where Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead is just like anything that Graham Coxon touches as a guitar is just like amazing, and he's spot on. It's just like
I agree. Yes.
he's so creative and just knows what he's doing, and yeah, but it's again just a really good album. If you get a chance, check it out. Another reason why I would say that it's also overlooked at the time was because What's the Story, Morning Glory came out on October 2nd, 1995, where The Great Escape came out on September 11th. So
close.
Yeah, so close in timing, and it's like watching that documentary too. It's kind of crazy that Damon Arban actually was the one who was the more competitive. He like Graham Coxon was kind of saying, he's kind of like the polar opposite of Damon, and he's just like, yeah, like I'm not about competing to hit the number one. He's like, I just kind of want to make good music. Where Damon's like, yeah, we gotta beat these guys, and it's kind of like a fun, just a really good rivalry. If anything, the art or the fans actually get the benefit of it. It's amazing thing, and yeah, so it was overlooked once What's the Story, Morning Glory hit. It kind of just overshadowed it, and
Right.
it took off. But maybe What's the Story, Morning Glory will make another appearance on something else. But did you want to end this one, or should I think we're good?
Yeah, I think we're pretty solid here, and I think the key thing here is that as much as we're talking about these albums, definitely, as always, check them out. Check them out because the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. But regardless, though, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. So we'll obviously have comments, and I'm always interested in learning, and so is Blake.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, new artists, something we haven't heard. I think in this day and age too, it can be very difficult to sort of filter through a lot of the artists that are coming out now, and of course it's easier to access, so to speak, especially with new artists to like learn about. Some of these artists it took time or what have you, but definitely turn us on to what you're into. We'd love to hear.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you guys will listen to the next one, and we'll have a good show for that one, and keep your ears open and your minds open as well. I don't know. Is that our sign off, or we'll make something up? Don't go.
Sounds
with that one.
good.
Yeah,
Well, it's probably better than the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
So there we go. So,
anyways,
yeah.
The proof is in the sound. How about that? Right. All right. Well, have a good one.